Will Edwin find his true love? Will he unite the seven kingdoms? Will he avenge his father's death? Stay with us for this thrilling story of courage, love, and destiny. The night of vengeance. The darkness of the night was growing deeper. The moon was in the sky, but its light seemed to hesitate to touch the earth. The smell of debris, smoke, and burnt wood still lingered in the air. Edwin lay unconscious on the ground. Blood had dried on his chest, but his breath was still faintly coming. In the distance, the sound of horses' hooves could be heard. The enemy soldiers were still searching the area. Edwin tried to move, but his body wouldn't cooperate. In his mind, Oswald's face appeared, the moment when his friend had been killed right before his eyes. A sigh escaped Edwin's lips, but with it a vow was formed within him. This isn't over. I will take revenge on them all. Suddenly, a shadow leaned over him. Edwin tried to open his eyes. It was an old farmer, who quickly picked him up and dragged him behind the rubble. Stay quiet, boy. If the soldiers see you, you'll die too. The old man took him behind his broken house. There he had a small underground shelter. He laid Edwin down there. Edwin weakly asked, "Who are you?" The old man replied, "I am Edok, the last living person of this village. Everyone else is dead. You would have died too if I hadn't come." Edwin, in a faint voice, said, "I can't die. Not until I bring those beasts to justice." Edok saw the burning fire in his eyes and fell into thought. "Perhaps this is the day we've been waiting for. But you still need to rest. The enemy is gone, but they will return. We must hide you." Edwin stayed in that underground room for several days. The old man treated him with herbs, cleaned his wounds, and told him stories. Stories of the seven kingdoms, tales of their kings' feuds, and the dream that had been buried in every farmer's heart for years, that one day someone would come who would unite everyone. With every story he heard, Edwin grew stronger. He made a decision. He would no longer be just a farmer. He would become a soldier, one who would avenge his father, one who would avenge the blood of his village. One night, when the moon shone in full glory, Edwin said to Edok, "It's time. I need the sword that belonged to my father." Edok was taken aback. "How do you know?" Edwin's eyes gleamed. "Before my father died, he said the sword is the legacy of our family's destiny. Don't give it to anyone until I come to take it." Edok sighed and dug into the ground to retrieve an old wooden chest. Inside it was a beautiful sword, its hilt gleaming. Edok said, "This is not just a weapon, it's a promise. Whoever takes it must fulfill it." Edwin took the sword in his hand. A strange courage surged within him, as if the sword had breathed new life into his body. "Tomorrow I will start my journey," Edwin said. "Where will you go?" Edok asked. "To each of the seven kingdoms' kings. I will convince them that this foreign enemy will destroy us all. If we don't unite now, everything will be lost," Edok replied. "It won't be easy." "The kings don't like each other," Edwin responded with a determined tone. "They don't have to like each other, they just have to stand together." That night, for the first time, Edwin closed his eyes in peace. Outside, the moonlight spread across the land, but now he didn't feel the darkness. It seemed as though the moon itself was witnessing his journey. The next morning, he set out with his sword. The road was dangerous. Enemy soldiers were patrolling everywhere. Edwin had to stay alert at all times. Several times, he barely escaped. Once a soldier even saw him. But Edwin managed to hide among the trees and save himself. During his journey, he met others who were also fleeing to save their lives. Each had a painful story. Some had lost their families, others their farms. Edwin listened to each one, gathering their pain in his heart. This pain became his strength. The story ends when Edwin reaches the gates of the first kingdom. The soldiers block his path. Edwin places his sword on the ground and says, "I didn't come to fight. I came to save. Tell the king that Edwin is here," and he brings news that could shake his crown. The soldiers look at him, then glance at each other. Finally, one soldier goes inside. Edwin's heart races. This was the first test of his journey. The night before the storm, his heart was pounding. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet, and his boots were caked with mud. He looked at his sword, still stained with blood, as if it were holding onto his father's blood itself. Moments later, the door opened and a tall soldier appeared. "The king wishes to hear you. Remember, one wrong word and your head will be cut off," Edwin said. "I will only speak the truth." As he entered the hall, the grandeur of the palace surrounded him. The walls bore scenes of ancient wars. Heavy torches flickered, and the minister's eyes fixed on him, all reminding Edwin that this was the decisive moment. The king spoke. "Tell me, who are you?" Edwin knelt and said, "I am Edwin, son of a farmer. I am the last living witness of my burned village. My father was murdered, my friends slaughtered. If you do not prepare, the same fate awaits your kingdom." Whispers stirred among the ministers. The king called for a sword. Edwin presented his father's blade. The king examined it deeply and said, "You have courage. But if you are wrong, this sword will be turned against you." Edwin replied, "I would give my blood before I deny the truth." The next morning, Edwin left the palace, his heart filled with resolve and his eyes burning with fire. Edwin and Ella's first meeting. The rain had stopped, but the air was still damp. Edwin's body was exhausted. He had been traveling for days, and when he reached the village gate, his steps faltered. This village, unlike the others, was not deserted. There were signs of life. Children's laughter, women's chatter, and somewhere far off the barking of a dog. In the center of the village, he saw an old hut outside which wounded people sat. Slowly, he walked there. From inside came a soft humming voice. When he stepped in, time seemed to stop. In front of him, a girl was tending to a wounded man's arm. A few strands of her hair had fallen across her forehead. Her hands were gentle yet firm. In her eyes was the kind of peace Edwin had not felt in years. Ella looked up. "Who are you?" she asked softly. Edwin stared at her for a few moments before coming to his senses. "I'm a traveler. Bandits attacked me on the way." Ella's eyes stayed on his face. "That cut is deep. Sit down, I'll dress it." Edwin hesitated. He was used to fighting, but not to showing weakness before someone. Yet there was a strange confidence in Ella's tone. He sat down. As she applied the ointment, she said, "There's anger in your eyes, but also some hidden pain." Edwin took a deep breath. "My village burned. Everything I had is gone." Ella's hands paused for a moment. She said softly, "There are tears in your eyes, but you don't want to cry." For the first time, Edwin tried to unburden his heart before someone. "I will avenge my village. I will stop every person who slaughters the innocent." Ella smiled as she wrapped his wound. "And who will stop you? In your eyes is a light, not one that burns others, but one that shows the way." Edwin stared at her face for a moment. Ella tore a small piece from her shawl and tied on it her personal emblem, made of red thread. "Keep this. It will remind you that somewhere someone prays for you." Edwin pressed the cloth to his chest. "I will return." The words escaped his lips. Ella nodded gently, and in her eyes was a strange glow, as if she were seeing someone her heart had begun to beat for. As Edwin mounted his horse, for the first time, he felt his loneliness ease. A faint smile touched his lips, one that had been gone for months. The bandit attack and Ella's memory. Edwin had barely left the village when bandits attacked in the forest. The fight was fierce. He fought with all his strength, but one blow struck his shoulder and blood began to flow. In that moment, he clenched Ella's cloth in his fist and felt new courage rise within him. "I cannot fall yet. My promise is still unfulfilled." He drove the bandits back, but his body was battered with wounds. The burning village and the decisive moment on his way, he saw another village burning. Screams echoed everywhere. Enemy soldiers were dragging women away. Edwin drew his sword and said, "If I stay silent today, my purpose will die." He hurled himself upon the enemy like a storm. He struck down soldiers and freed the women and children, but his body suffered more wounds. When it was over, Edwin fell to his knees. Looking up at the sky, he said, "Oh God, keep me alive. My journey is not over yet. Ella's promise still remains." Night of Destiny. The villagers had returned home after a long, tiring day. The moon shone in the sky, and there was a coolness in the air. Edwin sat beside the fire, his sword resting nearby. During his journey, this was the first time he truly felt peace. Suddenly, footsteps echoed. Edwin startled and looked back. Ella came carrying a small wooden basket. "This is for you, some food, you must be hungry." Edwin looked at the basket. Inside were bread, cheese, and milk. "You shouldn't have troubled yourself," he said. Ella smiled. "This is not trouble, but joy. Today you gave hope to the wounded in our village. We cannot even thank you enough." Edwin exhaled softly. "Hope? I don't even know what my fate will be." Ella sat by the fire. "Do you doubt your destiny?" Edwin bowed his head. "I have seen with my own eyes the day my entire village burned. I could not save my mother. My father's blood spilled before me." His voice cracked. Ella gently touched his shoulder. "Sometimes we cannot save everyone, but we can preserve the humanity within ourselves. Today you did exactly that." Edwin looked into Ella's eyes for the first time. Those eyes were like a deep sea, combining tranquility and courage. "Your words are like a sweet spring flowing in a forest." Ella laughed softly. "This is the first time anyone has praised me in that way." Several moments passed in silence. The firelight danced on their faces. Ella looked up at the sky. "How bright the moon is, isn't it?" "It feels as though it watches over us," Edwin nodded. "I wish I could become like the moon, one who gives light in the darkness." Ella spoke quietly. "You already are light, Edwin. You awakened something in my heart. A belief that perhaps this world isn't as dark as I thought." Edwin gently took her hand. "If I return alive, will you wait for me?" A blush rose on Ella's face. "Yes, I will wait. And every night I will pray for you." At that moment the wind seemed to hold its breath. They gazed at each other. For the first time, Edwin felt his loneliness begin to shatter. The first touch of love Ella took from her shawl a small leaf, an herb with fragrance. "Keep this. It's for your wounds and for your heart too." Edwin tied it to the hilt of his sword. "This is now my most precious treasure." The village night was peaceful. Edwin, for the first time, wished to stay somewhere, but he knew the journey wasn't over. That night he stayed awake, replaying Ella's words in his mind. "Edwin's resolve. I'm not going just to avenge my village," he told himself. "I'm going to build a world where people like Ella don't live in fear." This decision made Edwin stronger than before. At dawn, he took the reins of his horse. Ella stood at the gate. "This is your journey, Edwin, but remember, someone prays for you." Edwin mounted and said, "And I'll fight so that the day comes when I can return." Ella nodded quietly and smiled, but her eyes brimmed with tears. Edwin glanced back one last time and urged his horse forward. Leaving the village behind, Edwin's journey began. The roads were rough and difficult. The horse would get stuck in mud or be soaked by rain. The leaf Ella had given him tied to his shoulder reminded him constantly that he was not alone. First night of the journey. Fear and memory. In the forest that night, he set up camp. The fire burned, but an eerie silence loomed all around. When wind rustled the trees, it sounded as though someone was following him. Edwin placed his sword nearby and gazed at the sky. "Ella, you said you would pray. Today, I need your prayers the most." Just as sleep began to take him, a wolf's howling echoed from afar. The horse shied. Edwin gripped his sword, eyes fixed on the forest. Suddenly a shadow moved. He drew his sword swiftly, but it turned out to be a hunting dog. The dog wore a rope around its neck, seeming to belong to some tribe. Edwin released it. "Go, be free, just as I set off to free my fate." Attacked by bandits. The next morning, while passing through a narrow gorge, 5 bandits blocked his path. Their eyes were filled with hunger and brutality. "Give up your horse and belongings, or we take your life." Edwin touched the cloth Ella had given him and said, "To take my life, you'll need to pay with your own." A fierce battle ensued. Edwin felled the first bandit with a blow of his sword. The other 4 attacked. Though Edwin's arm was deeply cut, he did not retreat. Eventually, 3 bandits were killed. The rest fled. Edwin was drenched in blood but remained standing. "I cannot fall yet. My purpose is still unfinished." Journey through the mountains. A few days later, Edwin reached a mountain path blanketed in snow, the cold biting. Food supplies dwindled. One night he was caught in a blizzard. Along with his horse, he sought refuge in a cave. His hands trembled, his body frail. He pulled out the leaf Ella gave him and said, "This light will not let me die." He lit a fire. For the first time he felt how love can become the power that sustains life. Another village, Ella's memory. After the mountains, he entered a small village. The locals were astonished he remained alive. The village healer treated his wounds. The healer's daughter asked, "Where have you come from?" Edwin smiled and replied, "From afar. But my heart was left behind somewhere." When he mentioned Ella, the girl said, "Love strengthens a person. You must turn your love into your strength, not your weakness." Edwin resolved not to waste time any longer. The next morning he prepared his horse and bid farewell to the villagers. A bloody battle. Not far ahead, Edwin saw enemy soldiers attacking a convoy. He immediately drew his sword. He rode in and joined the fight, felling one soldier and charging another. The battle was intense. Edwin was wounded but rescued some members of the convoy. Among them was a small child who cried, "Are you an angel?" Edwin embraced him. "No, I am just a man trying to extinguish darkness." Resolved to return to the king, that day Edwin vowed that he would not rest until all the realms unite under one standard. He said inwardly, "Ella, I will return only when I can give you a safe world." At sunset he moved forward again, this time with no fear in his eyes, but a new resolve. Rise of the village warriors. The deep darkness of night had spread everywhere. The rain had stopped, yet the dampness of the forest and the scent of earth hung in the air. Edwin's breaths were heavy. His sword still bore fresh blood, and the wounds across his body reminded him repeatedly how grueling this journey was. But the fire burning in his heart had not yet died out. Ella's presence. At the edge of the village, Edwin spotted an old hut with a lamp glowing inside. He approached it slowly. The door opened, and Ella appeared, surprise and concern in her eyes. "Edwin, you're hurt again?" she said, rushing forward to support him and lead him inside. For Edwin, this moment felt strange, as though he were forgetting his pain. Under a small lamp, Ella cleaned his wounds. When her gentle hands touched his flesh, his heart's beat surged. Ella said, "Your journey is not easy, but you risk your life trying to save everyone." "You're crazy, Edwin." Edwin looked into her eyes and replied, "Not crazy, forced. If I hadn't fought, tomorrow this land would lie under our enemies' feet." Ella bowed her head, as if she wanted to say something but lacked the courage. Finally she whispered, "I will pray that you win." It was the first time she had spoken of her prayers. Edwin felt as though new strength had been infused into him. Villagers' fear. The next morning, Edwin gathered the villagers. Fear showed plainly on their faces. They had seen flames far off the previous night, enemy soldiers approaching. Edwin spoke loudly. "This is no time to fear. To fight is what's needed. We've lost our loved ones. Now we will lose no more." An old chief stepped forward and said, "Edwin, we are farmers, not warriors." Edwin raised his sword to the sky and said, "A warrior is not one who always wins, but one who stands up to injustice. From today you all will be warriors." Hearing his words, excitement spread among the young men. Women began preparing bandages for the wounded. Edwin ordered the boys to gather wood and old weapons. He knew it was a small force, but this was the first step toward his dream. First dialogue between Edwin and Ella. That night, when everyone else had slept, Edwin sat alone. Ella came quietly and sat beside him. "You aren't asleep?" she asked. Edwin sighed. "How could I sleep when every moment feels like the enemy is drawing near?" Ella said, "There is much weight on your shoulders. Edwin, sometimes I think if you were like any other farmer, you'd be sleeping peacefully right now." Edwin turned toward her and gently said, "If I were like others, this village might not exist. You might not exist, and I might not still be alive." These words brought a faint smile to Ella's face. "You know, my mother always said, one who puts his life on the line for others has the most beautiful heart." For a few quiet moments, Edwin was silent. Then he said, "And know this may be the first time I feel someone truly understands me." Ella looked at him and said, Maybe that is why this prayer was meant for this very moment. This moment lost itself in their shared silence. Edwin realized how precious such quiet could be in the noise of war. Enemies plot the next morning. Edwin was informed that enemy soldiers had camped nearby. Their commander was watching. Edwin prepared his companions and positioned scouts on an old hill outside the village. That night, a spy returned with news. They will attack at dawn tomorrow. They have horses. We are all on foot. Edwin lifted his sword. Then we'll strike their camp tonight. They think us weak. Tomorrow they'll try to end us, but we'll surprise them. Preparing the attack that night, the villagers extinguished their torches and crept out in silence. Edwin led them from the front. Before leaving, Ella placed the red thread cloth back in his hand. Let this remind you that you are not alone. Edwin tied it to his arm and said, when the sun rises tomorrow, this land will be free. The night attack near the enemy's camp. Edwin signaled, and suddenly the attack began. The camp was thrown into confusion. The clash of swords and cries rent the night. Edwin confronted the enemy commander. The fight was fierce. Blades struck like lightning. In the end, Edwin wounded the commander with a powerful blow. The enemies fled. The villagers had won, though many lay wounded. Ella's care, when Edwin returned, he bore a deep wound on his shoulder. Ella rushed to clean it. You are crazy. Why risk your life? She exclaimed. Edwin smiled in pain and replied, because if I didn't fight, tomorrow you wouldn't be here. Tears welled in Ella's eyes. Perhaps you don't realize, Edwin, that you are no longer just the protector of this village. You are the guardian of my heart, too. Edwin stayed silent for a moment, then softly said, and maybe you don't realize how much you've given me a reason to live. That was their first mutual recognition. Edwin understood that this love was not his weakness, but his greatest strength. The village celebrated the victory, but Edwin knew this was only the first. The enemies would return in greater numbers. Now he would have to travel further to other kingdoms to awaken them too. Edwin looked up at the night sky and said, this is only the beginning. The real fight remains. In the background, the wind whispered, and from afar, the drums of enemy horn could be heard. The call to unity. The night still remained, but an eerie silence hung over the village. Edwin was cleaning his bloodied sword. In the firelight, both determination and fatigue were visible on his face. His wounds had not yet healed, but in his mind the next step was clear. This fight was no longer just for one village. It was a war for the entire region. Deciding to leave the village the next morning, Edwin gathered the villagers again. Ella stood among them. I depart tomorrow, Edwin said. I will rouse other villages, other chieftains. We cannot win this fight alone. Hearing this, a pang seized Ella's heart. You are leaving? We only just defeated the enemy. We only just began to live. Edwin spoke softly. Ella, this is the time I must unite everyone. Otherwise, the enemy will return with a greater army, Ella whispered. And what if you never return? Edwin paused for a moment, then said, Then you should know that I fought until my very last breath. Edwin's journey. The next morning, Edwin left the village with 2 young companions. Along the way, rain turned the ground into mud. They passed through forests, crossed rivers, and climbed mountain paths. Everywhere Edwin found villages cowering under fear. He stopped in every village, rousing people, speaking with their chieftains, inspiring them. In many places he faced resistance. Some were afraid to fight. At one village, an old chieftain said, We have shed too much blood. We want peace, not war. Edwin looked into his eyes and said, Peace will not be given to you. You must seize it. If you appear weak, the enemy will oppress you more. Your children's future depends on your choice. Hearing those words, the old chieftain gave Edwin his old spear. This is my spear. Take it where the war for freedom will be fought. Letters from Ella. During the journey, Edwin received letters from Ella. Each letter carried her prayers and news of the village. In one letter she wrote, The villagers no longer see you only as their protector, but as their hero. Children tell your stories, and girls pray that you return unhurt. Reading that letter, a smile came to Edwin's lips. He pressed it to his chest and said, "I will return, Ella, for you and for all of them." The enemy's new plan. One night, Edwin learned that the enemy had deployed a new commander in the field. He was harsher and more cunning than the previous one. He had burned several nearby villages to strike fear into others. Edwin resolved that the time had come to assemble his small force and wage a decisive battle to stop the enemy. Preparing Edwin's army, Edwin called the youths from every village. They trained day and night, learned archery, ambush tactics, and repaired old weapons. During this time, Edwin's wounds healed, but his memory of Ella deepened. Often he would sit by the fire at night, reading her letters and gazing at the sky. Edwin and Ella reunited after several weeks. Edwin returned to his village. Ella greeted him joyfully. "You've come back." With a slight smile, Edwin said, "I promised I would." Ella softly said, "You look stronger than before." Edwin replied, "Because now I am not alone. I have companions, an army, and a dream to fulfill." Ella looked into his eyes and said, "And maybe now you have a reason to return alive." The moment faded into silence between them. But now it was clear that their bond had deepened. Edwin stood with his army outside the village. In the distant horizon, dust rose. The enemy was approaching. He raised his sword to the sky and declared, "This fight is not just for land, but for our future. Whoever falters today will be slave tomorrow." The entire army let out a unified cry. From a distance, Ella watched the scene, her face a mixture of fear and pride. In the background, the drums began to beat, and the pounding of enemy horse hooves could be heard approaching. The last night before dawn. The deep silence of the night was punctuated by torches burning outside the village, testifying to the coming battle. Edwin sat on a large stone, cleaning his sword. The flickering firelight played over his face, and his eyes held the kind of glow seen only in those who have gazed death in the face. The last night, Ella came quietly and sat near him. "You're not sleeping?" Edwin gave a faint smile. "If I sleep, I will dream." "The time for dreaming is over, Ella. Now is the time to be awake." Ella placed her hand on his wound. "Tomorrow's fight will not be easy for you. You haven't fully healed yet." Edwin sheathed his sword and looked at her. "I promised I would return. What happens tomorrow isn't entirely in my hands. Only one thing is, I will fight until my last breath." Tears came to Ella's eyes. "Do you even know what the village will be like without you?" Edwin said softly, "And if I don't fight, this village might never be at all." Preparing the army, before sunrise the next morning, Edwin gathered his forces. Young and old stood in a circle. Edwin raised a torch and said, "Today will decide whether we remain a living people or become slaves. The enemy has more weapons, more numbers, but they do not have what we have: our land, our resolve, and our love." All the young men raised their swords into the air. A cry rose up, as if the whole village had woken at once. Ella's final token as the army moved out. Ella came forward. She handed Edwin a small amulet. "This was given by my father. It bears the sign of the sun. He used to say it protects the brave." Edwin put the amulet around his neck and said, "When that sun rises tomorrow, it will see us victorious." Facing the enemy at the edge of the forest, Edwin saw the enemy lines spread across the horizon. Hundreds of soldiers, ranks of horses, banners waving in the wind. Edwin signaled his men to hold back and rode forward himself. "Tonight we strike their tents, but remember, our aim is to put fear into their hearts. Only when the enemy is afraid will we win." The first strike at dusk, Edwin and his companions attacked the enemy tents. Fires spread, tents burned, and the enemy soldiers panicked. But that was only the opening. The real battle was to come the next day. That night, Edwin called his men back and said, "We have put fear into their hearts. Tomorrow we will crush them in the field." Ella's prayer back in the village. Ella prayed through the night. She raised her hands to the sky. "Oh God, save Edwin. grant power to his sword, steadfastness to his feet. Dawn the next morning, a fog lay over the field. The plain was deserted. Edwin lined his army in formation, took a deep breath and said, "Remember, we fight for our land. Whoever falls today will lay the foundation for tomorrow's freedom." As the sun rose, the enemy drums began to beat. The thunder of horses' hooves grew nearer. Edwin raised his sword to the sky and declared, "Today the verdict will be made." The siege and the turning blade. The night sky wore a shroud of fear. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the air was heavy with the scent of rain. Edwin stood outside the fortress beside his horse, gripping the old sword, stained with his father's blood. Around him were his few loyal soldiers, sent by the king to accompany him. Each face bore stern resolve, and eyes burned with the same flame, the dream of seeing their land free. Edwin looked to his companions and quietly said, "Today's battle is not just for land. It is for our honor, for future generations. If we retreat today, our descendants will be born into slavery and die as slaves." A young soldier asked Edwin, "The enemy outnumbers us many times over. Can we really win this war?" Edwin looked to the sky and raised his sword. "Victory is never guaranteed by numbers. Victory is guaranteed by courage. And today, our courage is stronger than theirs." Preparing the battlefield, as dawn broke, the enemy army appeared on the horizon. Hengst's soldiers rode on horseback, armored, wielding long spears and sharp swords. The drumbeats and the thunder of hooves made the ground tremble. Edwin commanded his men, "Take your positions. Archers, stay ready. When they draw near, unleash the first strike." Tension filled the air. Every soldier knew this was a fight for life and death. The first assault, when the enemy came into arrow range, Edwin raised his hand and shouted, "Now!" Over 100 arrows soared into the sky, striking the front line of the enemy. Horses fell, soldiers screamed, but the Hengst forces did not break. They drew their swords and charged. Edwin unsheathed his own sword and called, "Come with me!" Steel clashed on steel. Cries, horse whinnies, and clashing blades turned the battlefield into a hellscape. Edwin is wounded during the battle. One soldier struck Edwin from behind. He raised his shield to block, but the blade still pierced his shoulder. Edwin stumbled to the ground, but immediately recovered and slashed down the attacker. Blood flowed from his shoulder, but he would not yield. "I will not fall." By falling means everyone's spirit would break, he told himself. Ella's prayer. Meanwhile, in the village, Ella sat clutching the cloth she had given Edwin. She prayed silently, "O God, if Edwin cannot return alive, all our hope will die. Protect him!" The enemy's ruse at the height of battle, Edwin spotted an enemy contingent sneaking around the rear of the fortress. It was a stratagem. If they succeeded, the fortress would fall. He called to 2 of his men, "Hold the others here, I'll go back." Though wounded, Edwin rode toward the fortress's back. He saw the enemy had set fires and were breaking gates. With all his strength he attacked. His sword flashed, many foes fell, though he was exhausted. Then an enemy commander noticed him and charged. Edwin versus the commander. The commander, clad in heavy armor, swung a long sword. Edwin blocked with his shield, then retreated and launched his own strike. A fierce duel ensued. Each blow could decide life or death. Finally, Edwin seized an opening and drove his sword through the commander's armor. The commander fell. The remaining soldiers, panicked, fled. End of the battle. By evening, the enemy had withdrawn. Edwin stood at the gate of the fortress, his garments soaked in blood, but his eyes shining fiercely. "This is only the beginning. We've won a battle, but the real war remains. We must bring other kingdoms to our side." Suddenly a soldier came running. "Edwin, the king requests your presence immediately." "There is urgent news." Edwin's heart pounded. "Is there another attack, or has a kingdom joined us?" He set off toward the palace. Ella stood at the gate. She saw him, wounded and weary, yet alive. Tears welled in her eyes. "You've come back," she said softly. Edwin smiled and replied, "I promised I would. But Ella, there is no time yet. What I am going to hear may change everything." The fire rekindled. Edwin entered through the grand gates of the palace. His steps were shaky, but not his resolve. The hall was dim, lit only by torches casting strange shadows across the walls. The king sat on his throne, his face stern, his eyes filled with a strange fear. Edwin bowed and spoke, "Your Majesty, you summoned me urgently." "What news?" The king took a deep breath. "Edwin, our spies have reported that Hengst has allied with the wild tribes of the north. His army has doubled in size. If we don't prepare in time, our next battle could erase us from existence." Edwin planted his sword into the ground and said, "Then we must not waste time. Send me to the other kingdom chiefs. I will convince them that if they don't stand with us today, their lands will burn tomorrow." The king nodded. "You're right. But this won't be easy. Many chieftains dislike you. You may have to risk your life," Edwin smiled. "Your Majesty, when I swore on my father's grave to free this land, I accepted that risk." A new journey begins. The next morning, Edwin set off again with a few companions. The journey was harsh, snowfall had begun, and the mountain paths were slippery. In some places, enemy scouts were hiding, attempting ambushes, but Edwin countered every strike. Along the way, they found a village burned to the ground. Edwin dismounted and walked through the smoking ruins. "This is why we must fight," he said. "This village is a symbol of Hengst's cruelty. If we stay silent, our homes will be next." The chief of Sorrel, after days of travel, they arrived at the first kingdom, Sorrel. The chief there looked at Edwin and said, "You want us to send our army with you? Shed our blood in your fight? What do we get in return?" Edwin stepped forward and replied, "You get your land. You get a future for your children. If Hengst wins, your fortress will burn, and your daughters will be taken as slaves. I don't want you to say tomorrow that I didn't warn you in time." The chief was silent for a moment. Then he said quietly, "There's truth in your voice, Edwin. I will send my army with you. But remember, if you lose, it will be our ruin too." Edwin smiled. "I didn't come to lose. I came to change history." Ella's dream back at the palace. Ella sat thinking about Edwin. Every night she dreamt of him returning to her, wounded but alive. She would wake up with her heart pounding. One day she said to her mother, "Mother, I feel Edwin needs my prayer. He's fighting alone, but I want him to know I'm with him." Her mother placed a hand on her head and said, "Child, sometimes a prayer is more powerful than a sword. Keep praying." An ambush in the dark. As Edwin journeyed toward the next kingdom, arrows suddenly rained down in the dark of night. One struck him in the arm and he fell from his horse. His companions rushed to him. "Edwin, we need to return. You're injured." Gritting his teeth, Edwin replied, "No, we can't turn back now. If I fall now, no other chief will join us. I must reach the next kingdom." They stayed there for the night. By morning, a healer was summoned to an old hut nearby. This was when a new character entered the story, Arya, the healer's daughter. Arya stopped as she saw Edwin. He spoke weakly, "Don't waste time, just patch the wound." "I need to move on," Arya smiled softly. "I've never seen such a stubborn patient. First, I need to stop the bleeding, or you'll die before you even leave." Edwin looked into her eyes and, for the first time, felt this war wasn't just a battle. A new feeling had begun to grow within him, a new spark. During the next few days of healing, Edwin began to value Arya's presence. Arya too admired his courage and sacrifice. One night Arya said, "Edwin, you know you should have died. The arrow struck a fatal spot. Had I not arrived in time, you'd have bled out." Edwin smiled. "Maybe fate wants me to live. Because this war isn't over yet." Arya fell silent, her face calm. That night, Edwin realized that he wasn't just fighting to win. He was beginning to want to live for someone. A prayer and a warning. The next morning, Edwin took his leave. Arya stood at the edge of the village. The first rays of the sun fell on Edwin's face. Arya looked up to the sky and raised her hands in prayer. "O God of the heavens, this warrior fights in your name. Strengthen his steps, clear his heart of fear, and guide his sword with justice." Edwin stood silently, feeling a strange strength descend into his heart. He bowed and said, "Arya, your prayer will be with me. It's my greatest shield." Arya softly replied, "Remember, you are not alone. This land, its people, we're all with you." Edwin mounted his horse and rode off with determination. The wind carried a strange solemnity, as if the sky itself had become a witness to his journey. Then suddenly, a messenger came running toward him. "Edwin, the enemy has attacked our first allied kingdom again. The king has sent an urgent message. Return immediately." Edwin pulled the reins sharply and said, "We're going back. The real battle begins now." The edge of war, the return from the border night, had fallen deep. Edwin was galloping through the cold wind. The chief's words echoed in his mind. "We are with you, Edwin. If your kingdom is attacked, our army will fight beside you." This promise was a ray of hope for Edwin. He knew that this alliance would pose a serious challenge for the enemy, but he had to reach the palace as soon as possible to inform the king. Every hour was precious. The enemy forces were already on the move. The journey was long and exhausting. More than once it felt like he might fall off his horse, but he held himself together. At one stop he drank water, wrapped his wound, and rode on. By the final hours of the night, as a faint light began to appear in the sky, the palace towers came into view in the distance. Return to the palace and tension in the hall. The palace gates were wide open, as if everyone had been waiting for his arrival. When Edwin stepped into the royal hall, silence fell over the room. In the flickering torchlight, the king's face looked even more serious. Ministers were hunched over maps. The king looked at Edwin and exhaled deeply. "At last you've returned. We've been waiting anxiously for your report." Edwin bowed and said, "Your Majesty, I return with success. The chief of the border state has pledged his support. If the enemy attacks, he will send his army. But we must prepare immediately. The enemy has camped at the border, and they outnumber us." Whispers spread among the ministers. Some expressed joy, others were clearly anxious. The king raised his hand to silence them. "Edwin, your efforts have borne fruit. But now we must plan wisely. We cannot let the enemy get close to the castle." Strategy and a decisive Plan A map was laid out in the center of the hall. Edwin pointed to the border and said, "Here is where the enemy is camped. Their supply route passes through a mountain pass. If we send our army there and block it, we can cut off their supplies and weaken them." A minister objected, "But to do that, we'd have to send our troops beyond the castle walls. If we fail, our city will be left vulnerable." Edwin replied firmly, "Waiting is a bigger risk. If we don't act first, they'll surround us. We must strike now." The king fell into deep thought before saying, "You're right, Edwin. I entrust this mission to you. You will lead our forces." Preparation of the military camp. The next day, the city buzzed with activity. Soldiers sharpened weapons, horses were readied, and supplies were gathered. Edwin went to every soldier, boosting their morale. He said, "This war isn't just for our kingdom, it's for our freedom. If we win, future generations will be born free." The air echoed with the cries of the soldiers. Edwin felt that this was more than just a war. It was a sacred oath, Ella's letter and Edwin's emotions. That night, a soldier entered Edwin's tent and handed him a letter. It was from Ella. The letter read, "Edwin, I've heard stories of your bravery. May God protect you. Know that you are not alone. Your name is in every prayer. Our hopes rest on your shoulders." Edwin pressed the letter to his chest and looked to the sky. "Ella, your prayers are my strength. I will return, and until then you must wait for me." The night attack the next morning, the army set out. Edwin spurred his horse forward. The sky was overcast, and the air was heavy with the stillness of an approaching storm. But as they neared the border, Edwin noticed strange activity around the enemy camp. "Something's wrong," he muttered under his breath. Suddenly a soldier ran up to him. "Sir, our spies report that the enemy has learned of our movements. They've sent a detachment to ambush us." Edwin gripped his sword tightly and said, "Then we'll wait for them right here. This is the moment history will remember." In the darkness of the night, the flickering lights of the enemy's torches appeared in the distance. Edwin lined up his forces. Every soldier's face was lit with determination. Edwin shouted, "Remember, we're not just fighting for our lives, we're fighting for the future of our people. No one will retreat." A distant war drum echoed through the air. The enemy was advancing. Edwin drew his sword and roared, "Prepare yourselves! Tonight we decide whether we remain free or fall into slavery." The day of valor, nightfall, and Edwin's burden. Near the border, in the stillness of the forest, Edwin's army sat quietly. The tree branches swayed in the wind, and the occasional hoot of an owl made the silence even more eerie. Edwin sat beneath an old tree, studying the map in the dim light. There was no sleep in his eyes, for tomorrow would be a decisive day. If we lose this battle, it won't just be me. It will be my entire people who lose their breath. He whispered to himself. Chief Sorel came and sat beside him. "Edwin, you don't need to be afraid. You've brought us all under one banner. That alone is a great victory." Edwin took a deep breath and said, "But the enemy has twice the numbers. We'll need strategy to win. Otherwise, all our sacrifices will be in vain." The spirit of the soldiers. Around the campfire, the soldiers were sharpening their swords. One young soldier said, "Tomorrow's battle will decide everything. If we win, our children will be born free." Another asked, "And if we lose?" Edwin overheard this and stood up. "If we lose, even our bones will speak of our defiance." "Tomorrow is the day of our honor," the soldiers cheered, and the air was filled with roaring chants. The morning of battle at sunrise, Edwin put on his armor, mounted his horse, and stood before his army. "My brothers, today our land will be decided. If you step back, know that your future generations will be born into slavery. But if you stand your ground, your names will be written in history in golden letters." The soldiers raised their swords toward the sky and shouted, "Freedom! Freedom!" In the first assault, the enemy launched a sudden attack through the mountain pass. A rain of arrows poured down. Edwin commanded, "Raise your shields." The arrows clattered against the shields and fell to the ground. Edwin then charged forward, breaking into the enemy lines. His sword struck like lightning. The battle raged for hours. The ground turned red with blood. Edwin's arm was wounded, but he refused to stop fighting. The memory of Ella for a moment. Edwin dismounted to catch his breath. He took out the cloth Ella had given him and held it tightly in his hand. "Ella, you said love gives strength. Today, I need your prayer." With that thought, he gathered his courage and jumped back into the battlefield. The evening assault, as the sun began to set, the enemy launched a second, larger assault. This time, they tried to flank and attack from behind. Edwin quickly called his commanders and changed the formation. "We will surprise them in the dark. At midnight, we'll strike their camp." That night, while the enemy slept, Edwin led his elite forces in a sudden attack. The enemy tents caught fire, horses screamed in panic, and chaos spread. By the time the enemy woke up, Edwin's soldiers were already among them. The surprise attack was devastating. Their supplies were destroyed, and the army began to scatter. The decisive day. By the next morning, the enemy regrouped and launched a full-scale assault. This was the final battle, a fight between life and death. Though heavily outnumbered, Edwin's forces didn't retreat a single step. One of the enemy commanders charged straight at Edwin. What followed was a fierce duel. Amid dust and blood, Edwin delivered the final blow, felling the commander. Seeing this, the enemy's morale broke. But the battle was not over yet. A second wave of the enemy had arrived. The arrival of Allied forces. Just then, a messenger arrived with news. "Chief Sorel has arrived with reinforcements." Edwin shouted with joy, "The enemy's game is over." Sorel's army attacked from the rear. The enemy was now surrounded from both sides. Within moments, panic spread, and the enemy began to flee. But just as victory seemed near, an arrow struck Edwin. He fell from his horse. His soldiers screamed, "The commander is down!" Lying on the ground, Edwin raised his sword toward the sky and shouted, "I'm still alive! The battle is not over!" The soldiers, filled with new courage, surged forward with renewed fury and dealt the enemy a crushing defeat. The burden of wounds and a moment of consciousness after the battle. When Edwin was brought back to the palace, his body bore many deep wounds. Blood still flowed, but there was a strange light on his face, as if he knew this pain was temporary and his mission was not yet over. The healer said, "He needs rest, or else these wounds will become infected." Ella sat quietly by Edwin's side without saying a word. She wiped sweat from his forehead, gave him water, and stayed awake all night, praying every moment, "Oh God, keep him safe. If he dies, this fight will be over." 3 days later, Edwin opened his eyes for the first time. The light hurt his eyes. Ella smiled and said, "You're back." "We thought you had left us," Edwin whispered softly. "Did we win?" Ella nodded, tears welling up. "Yes, you won, but you have to get up again." This was just the first battle. The chief's court and a decision a few days later, as Edwin's wounds began to heal, he was summoned to the chief's court. The chief sat surrounded by burning torches. The atmosphere was serious. The chief said, "Edwin, you have proven you are no ordinary warrior. Because of you, our village is safe. Because of you, our children live. What do you want?" Edwin knelt and said, "I want you to send your army with me. If we fight alone, the enemy will pick us off one by one. We must unite." Silence fell over the court. The chief took a deep breath, as if the decision was difficult, then said, "My army will go with you, but this will be your war. You must convince the other kingdoms yourself." Edwin bowed as he. Thank you for your love and support. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The next episode is coming soon. Will Edwin marry Ella? Will he unite the 7 kingdoms? Find out in the next episode.